Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and prepare for your wallet to cry because this is the Samsung Odyssey G9. This is a 49-inch super ultra-wide gaming monitor that's an absolute joy to game, work, stream and more on. This is a really good monitor and an upgraded model of the Samsung CRG9, another 49-inch model that I tried out previously that I really enjoyed. And if you subscribe because you watched that video, you're going to really enjoy this one as well, because the G9 is a fantastic update to the CRG9 with a number of features and specification enhancements that make it well worth considering. Now, this is an expensive gaming monitor, but one that's absolutely joyful for a number of reasons. A really nice panel with a rich and vivid display that has an incredible peripheral vision to it that you can see here in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It's hard to do it justice, but I'm going to try as I go through this review video and I go in depth on what it's like. But before I start that, I want to show you a couple of bits from where I started unboxing it and putting it on my desk and give you an idea of just how huge this thing is. This is a 49-inch monitor with a 1000R curve, so it is a curved screen, but it does take up quite a lot of room on your desk. Now, I have quite a large desk and I'll link to that in the description so you can see the length of it. It's 2 meters long, and the Odyssey G9 takes up a good portion of it. Probably about 70% of the desk is taken up by the screen, and it is a magnificent beast that includes a very nice setup, and I'll show more close-ups of the hardware at the end. But what I wanted to do is demonstrate the size and the curve on this thing. Look at the curve on that, it's insane. That is a very large and steep curve that you can fit 2 fists underneath, which is a strange measurement, but I thought it was good to show just how vivid and curved that is. What you might think is actually a really shocking curve is actually not terribly bad, especially when you have that 49-inch curvature to it and it's sitting in front of you. It basically spans around and wraps around and gives you a really immersive view of it. I find it fantastic in that way. I've tried out some smaller versions of this screen, the Samsung G7, which I'll be doing a video on separately, but I found that the curve on that was quite steep for such a small monitor. But on this 49-inch ultra wide, it really suits it very nicely and it's not a problem to use. There are some quirks of it though, which is odd. For example, if you're talking towards the screen, for say into a microphone, you can really notice the difference if you turn to the right and talk rather than talking straight into it, the way the voice reverberates. That's a very strange quirk of the design, but otherwise the aesthetic is very nice. As you'll see, this monitor is a real looker, and that's because of the design and specification of it. This is a beast of a screen with 5120 by 1440 pixels, has HDR1000, 240 Hz refresh rate, a 1 millisecond response time. It has a mega dynamic contrast ratio. It's a QLED panel with VA technology. It also is a quantum dot color, and it has a number of other things that I'll cover off in the description, as well as links to the official pages so you can find out more. But one of the things is it also upgrades from the CRG9 in 2 ways, 2 main ways. It has NVIDIA G-Sync now, and it also has a 240 Hz refresh rate. However, as I said, you do need a bit of a beast of a machine in order to run it, because obviously it is quite a lot of pixels in this screen and it requires some power in order to get the maximum amount of frame rates out of it. I do kind of feel like the 240 Hz might be over the top and unnecessary, because it's unlikely you're going to get games running at that FPS in order to justify that. A lot of the games that I played, especially if you've got them on visually pleasing ultra settings, obviously hitting around 50 to 100 FPS. Assassin's Creed, for example, maxed out, as you can see here, looks absolutely glorious with the maximum pixels and maximum settings. It was about 50 FPS, which doesn't sound terribly good, but it still runs smooth and it looks fantastic. And to be honest, this sort of FPS count is what I'd expect from this game. I've played it in 4K on a 4K 27-inch monitor and got about the same FPS, and I've tried it on other machines with a similar sort of result. However, the glory of ultra-wide gaming cannot be overstated. There is something really wonderful about it. Now, one of the other things that I really like about this panel is it essentially is 2 27-inch 1440p displays together. That's 2560 by 1440 on each side. So if you plug in 2 cables In this case, I've got 2 DisplayPort cables plugged into it from the same machine. I've then activated picture-in-picture mode, and that means that I can then use it to stream. One of the problems that you have if you stream on YouTube or Twitch to try and capture any video footage is that videos need to be in 16:9, otherwise you get squashed displays with black bars. If you're trying to stream on a 32:9 or 21:9 gaming monitor with super ultra wide or ultra wide displays, you have a black bar setup which is just awful, and you either need to crop things or you need to set it up another way. So I went from a super ultra wide monitor to a 16:9 4K monitor just so that I could stream on Twitch and YouTube and do more videos on gameplay videos and stuff. So when I found out that the Odyssey G9 was capable of picture by picture, I wanted to see if you could split the screen and use it in this way, and you can. That's the good news. So if you're wondering, you can have the game running on one screen and then Streamlabs OBS or OBS on the other, your Twitch chat, Discord, as you can see running here for me, and you can basically treat it like 2 monitors side by side, but without the bezels in the way. And obviously you have to take account for the curve of the screen, because you basically need to turn to the right as I'm doing here and play on the right hand side of the screen, which is a bit odd to get used to. But what it means is that I can use it for double means, because I can stream on Friday and Saturday when I like to play with my mates on this 27-inch version and still have a good experience for the viewers, while then if I want to play single player games and get the full-on ultra-wide experience, you can just switch the monitor back to the standard setup and play with 32:9 aspect ratio, which is a hell of a lot more immersive and really hard to understate just how fantastic that is. It is something you need to experience. I had a lot of comments on the previous videos talking about the CRG9 where people were saying, oh, it's so wide, you have to turn your head a lot to be able to see, you get a crick in your neck, or your eyes will be sore from looking around, and that is not how it works. The idea is that you are looking at the center of a screen and you get to see a lot of the world around you, and it makes for a really immersive experience. I've been gaming on ultra wide for a long time, but usually on a lot smaller screens than this. I had a 34-inch 1440p monitor that essentially was a 21:9 monitor, and I fell in love with ultra wide at that point, and I've been using it for a long time since. Essentially what you're looking at is the center of the screen, but the peripheral vision is out to the sides. Now in real life, if you're questioning whether this is worthwhile, just put your hands out to the side in front of you and see how far you can get your hands apart but still be able to see them out the corners of your eyes without moving your eyes away from the center of your vision, looking straight ahead. You'll see that you can see for quite a way. This is a strange example, but the point is, in real life when you're looking around, you can see a lot more around you than you can if you're just sitting looking at a flat 27-inch panel. So what this gives you is an advantage in games in that you can see a lot more around you. If you're playing a single player game, it makes the game a lot more immersive because you're immersed in the world and you get a really wonderful experience. In multiplayer games, it's also beneficial as well because you can see enemies on your left and right that other people using smaller screens won't be able to. You'll see them off in the distance, you'll see them moving around. They'll catch your peripheral vision, then you can quickly turn and put them in your sights if you're playing an FPS shooter, for example, and that makes for a really good experience too. Obviously you do need a powerful machine in order to run it, but the result is really nice. Now this panel is obviously fantastic for a number of reasons. As I said, it has HDR, and it's worth talking about HDR a bit later on. I'm going to go into a bit more depth as to why that can be a bit of a niggle with this screen, but it also has just a really solid color range to it, and it looks glorious. These clips from Red Dead Redemption just shows you the different color qualities and just the immersion of the graphics and the visuals. Red Dead Redemption 2 is another game that on really high settings runs with a quite low FPS count. As you can see, I'm getting about 50 FPS here, but the picture quality is amazing. The colors are really rich. The way the light breaks through the trees when you're in the woods, the sunrise and everything else, the darkness, it all just shows off how well this screen displays the game and just how glorious that ultra wide experience is, as well as all the way the screen handles colors and other things, and it looks absolutely fantastic too. Now I've obviously used this monitor for other things too. While I've been using it for day-to-day efforts, in the evenings I've been editing videos as I normally would, and here you can see me in Vegas Pro 17 it is interesting in that obviously because it's an ultra wide monitor, it's a bit more squashed than your traditional square monitor, so you've got less top to bottom height. For something like video editing, if that's something you do on a regular basis, you obviously get less of the main screen display, so the preview. You can rescale things and go up and down with the timeline, and it's something that I'm used to anyway because I've been using ultra wide monitors for a while. But it does mean that although you have loads of side to side space, you haven't got necessarily loads of up and down space. This is something I've managed to work around, and it's not a problem for me. However, I think it's worth highlighting and talking about what that's like. On the other hand, if you're using it for work purposes, you can use it like two 27-inch monitors side by side. So for example, 4 browsers or 4 applications open next to each other alongside. 4 all along there, you can see how much productivity you can get going. Also, with the fact that you can plug in HDMI and DisplayPort means you can get multiple inputs on it, and you can have a laptop, for example, plugged in and powering the screen instead, as I do with HDMI Connect. Now, going into the menus briefly, I'm not going to talk about all the different settings on here because you can find the best settings within a more technical guide or review, but I wanted to show off all the different things that you can do with it. Now, as I said, this has G-Sync. It also has HDR settings. You can also churn up the refresh rate and low input lag, response time, equalizer settings, and the black equalizer. There's a lot of different settings to tweak around with in here. However, I felt like even out of the box on its default settings, it looks really fantastic, and it's a really good setup in that way. As I said, you have options in here to change the size of the screen, but you also have the picture-by-picture display. In order to do that, you obviously have to have 2 cables plugged in and then switch it on within this menu system. It is another point of note worth talking about here actually. When you're using that menu system, there's basically a button underneath. That single button works as your power button and the button to navigate between all the different menus. It's fairly straightforward, but what you will notice probably is there is a little bit of wobble on the screen as it sits on the desk. So make sure you have a good solid desk to it, because if you're bashing into the desk a lot, you might find the monitor wobbles a bit on its stand. Another highlight is that you have an eye saver mode that takes out the blue light and makes it less harsh on the eyes. I like to use that during the day when I'm working. It really makes it easier on the eyes, and then you can turn it off for gaming at night and get a much better experience. With G-Sync set up, you can obviously turn on adaptive sync within the menu system, and then you need to go into NVIDIA's control panel and make sure G-Sync set up properly in there, and that's activated. Also worth noting that you want to make sure that the panel is set to 10-bit, because that's another highlight. It has 10-bit color, so it's really rich, and as default Windows sets it to 8, so you need to make sure you go into NVIDIA control panel and mess around with those settings, but you can basically make sure you're getting the best display possible and a really good overall effect. In Windows, you can also go into your advanced display settings, make sure you've got the right resolution set up, and then you can also change it to make sure the refresh rate is set to the right number, because the panel can be set to 240 Hz, but as default Windows sets it to 60, so it's worth noting either go into NVIDIA control panel or into Windows advanced settings and change that. Now, one of the problems I did have that I mentioned earlier on is with HDR. HDR I've always found to be a pain on various different monitors I've tested, but on this one it was particularly bothersome on some games. If you go into Windows HD color settings, you can turn HDR on. One of the highlights of this monitor is you don't then need to go into the menu and turn HDR on in the menu on the monitor itself. It automatically recognizes that Windows is sending an HDR display to the monitor, and it will switch to HDR mode automatically, which is really nice. One thing you will note though is that when HDR's on, if you're trying to play a game that doesn't have HDR, the result is that the dark areas become a lot lighter around areas of brightness. So where the screen was really black that you might have seen in that little bit of footage there, it was lighting up surrounding the cursor and becoming really white in that area, and it looks terrible and it looks like there's a problem with the monitor, but it's actually a finick with HDR in my experience, is that it is really painful to turn on and off, because if you're not using HDR, it doesn't work properly. If the game doesn't support it, it doesn't work properly. You need to make sure you turn it on in Windows and you turn it on in the game, and they're just going in and out and trying to get it to work nicely is a real mess, and obviously it varies from game to game. I have tried it with a few different games. Assassin's Creed Odyssey I managed to get it to work with nicely, as you saw the clips earlier on, but then when I tried to run it on Red Dead Redemption version, I think they've taken HDR out of it now. It used to be a thing, but doesn't seem to want to work anymore. And then there were other games where I had equal problems with it. It's also worth noting that there are some finicks with it if you've got it plugged in with both DisplayPort cables but you're not actually using picture by picture, and then you try to turn adaptive sync on. Found that to be an issue as well. For some reason, even though I haven't got picture by picture turned on the monitor, my PC recognised two displays, both with the same pixel density, both with 5120 by 1440. I thought there was two of them when there wasn't, and it was something to do with adaptive sync, so I found I had to unplug one of the connections. So there are sometimes some minor gripes with it, but to be honest, the overall experience has been really good. So good, in fact, that I'm trying to talk to Samsung to let me buy this monitor rather than have to send it back. And if they don't, I will be purchasing my own as soon as I can. It is a very expensive piece of kit, but for me it's worked out perfectly in terms of the delivery of the awesome gaming experiences, the multitasking for work. It's so nice to have one big monitor rather than two side by side. You haven't got any bezels to worry about, and because of the curve it just means it's a lot easier to use. Now this is obviously a personal experience, this is my experience. You might not agree with it. If you get a chance to try it out, you might not necessarily agree with me. There was another user in a previous chat that was on the other video on the CRG9 that said that the G9 was too curved for them. It has a 1000R curve. The CRG9 had 1800, which isn't quite as deep. And I feel like, for me personally, it's not a problem, but they said they didn't like it. I don't really see why it's an issue. Perhaps it depends on how you've mounted it and where you put it. This is quite close to me on the desk. As you can see, I'm basically sitting in front of it. You can wall mount it. There is a bracket for wall mounting it in the box. I wouldn't want to, I don't think. If you sat it back too far, you might have some issues. I think it would probably be worth putting it on your desk and experimenting with the distance that you want to use it at, and consider your options before you wall mount it. But for gaming, for me, it's been absolutely joyful, and it really looks great. You can see just the differences in the dark scenes, the bright ones. It handles the brightness and the darkness really well, as you'd expect from something with this contrast ratio and the high dynamic range and all those other settings, and it looks absolutely fantastic. I played all sorts of games, as you've seen in here. Red Dead Redemption 2, Forza Horizon 4, Microsoft Flight Simulator, The Outer Worlds, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Cuisine Royale, and a few other ones as well. And it's been glorious in all those games. Now, it is worth noting that there are some gripes with ultra-wide monitors, and it's not this G9 specifically, but any ultra-wide or super ultra-wide monitor. One problem you will have is that developers of games don't tend to take those designs into account when they're building cutscenes. So you can have an ultra-wide experience which fills your entire screen for the majority of the game, and then when you go to a cutscene, suddenly you've got black bars down the sides, and sometimes down the sides and above. So Red Dead Redemption 2, when it goes to a cutscene, you have a very small area of the screen that's suddenly showing you this scene with characters talking, and it really takes away from the immersion and it ruins it for me. But that's not a gripe against the screen, that is against the developers and the way they've set it up. And it's a shame, but it's worth noting, if you've never used super ultra wide or ultra wide before, you will find that an issue. The viewing angles on this thing are insane. I really thought there were going to be a problem from different angles, but actually, as you can see, I've recorded it from above and from both sides and from directly in front and below, and it looks great at all angles. And if you're sitting watching somebody else play, it's still a joy to watch as well, and it really looks the part too in that area. Another thing that's worth talking about is the way it displays movies. So if you're thinking about watching films on this, it's worth bearing in mind that because it's 32:9 and so gargantuan, you'll have the same problem you will with cutscenes in games, in that you'll have black bars. You can't fill the entire screen with film, it just doesn't work that way. So if you're playing Netflix, for example, you just won't get that display. However, you can watch a film on one half of the screen and fill up the majority of it and treat it like a 27-inch 16:9 panel without much of a problem. So there are ways around it, but it is worth noting that's the setup. Now, to go into a bit of the hardware and talk about what that's like, I showed off some of this at the beginning, but you can see there are other things worth discussing as well. On the rear, it has a very striking white design. They also have a number of other highlights to it that includes an infinity core lighting display that I'll talk to you about a bit more in a second. It has a really chunky stand to it, a nice solid thing that you basically need to screw into the rear. There's a cable management channel there as well that you can run your power cables, DisplayPort cable and other things through and down, and then you can hook the cover over the top of that so that they can then be hidden and tucked away, and then they come out the bottom and you can plug them in, run them and keep things nice and neat. The stand itself is nice and solid, however, as I did note earlier on, it does wobble a bit on the desk, so if you're using the menu or if you have a bit of a wobbly desk, then you might note an issue with it where it moves around a bit, and that is an unfortunate byproduct of just the size and the design of it, which is a bit of a shame. It comes with, rather interestingly, no power brick, so the power cable just plugs directly into the monitor, and it's not as long as I'd like, unfortunately. There are USB pass-through cables and DisplayPort cables included in the box as well. As I said, you need 2 cables in order to do the picture-by-picture, so I had 2 DisplayPort cables plugged into my PC and did picture-by-picture, but you could also plug in 1 DisplayPort into a PC and then 1 HDMI from a laptop, which is what I've done, so you could actually run 2 different machines on the same display. I don't know what you'd do with that. Maybe you have a streaming PC and a gaming PC and run them off the same monitor, or working on 2 machines at once, doing some serious multitasking, but it's nice to have that option. And you'll see you've got plenty of room to plug things in at the back as well, and there's a nice cover that you can put over it to keep it all out of sight, and then you have a hanger to put headsets on as well if you want to do that. Now, the Infinity Core lighting display is a gimmick in my mind. It is a RGB lighting ring that goes round the back of the stand, basically on the back of the monitor. It's a colourful ring that you can change the colours on in the menu, and you can change between a number of different colours. You can make it flash and glow and do other things. I have not noticed this when it's in use. I've had it on and turned on, and it isn't bright enough to light up the room, and it certainly doesn't do any sort of ambient backlighting or anything like that. So if you're expecting anything fancy from that, you're not going to get it. And I actually think that it's kind of pointless. I suppose it's going to depend on the setup of your room. If you're wall mounting it, it's definitely going to be pointless. If you're putting it on a desk where you have backlighting on it, like I do, where I've got Philips Hue strips running around the back, you're not going to notice it at all. And it really just doesn't seem like it's worth having on. I'm not sure why they've included it. It seems like a bit of a gimmick, and it's not terribly effective. Don't expect it to be like a monitor backlighting kit that can give you an ambient lighting. I think it's really just for show purposes, as is the back of the monitor itself. Nice white display with some various accents. Now, another thing to note that you might not have noticed in the video is that I haven't recorded any audio from the monitor, and that is because this monitor doesn't have any speakers. It has USB pass-through built into it, and it also has a headphone jack, so you can plug some headphones into it, but it doesn't actually put out any audio of its own. It has no speaker system built into it, which I think is probably not great. I personally don't use speakers from monitors anyway. I always have headsets on hand, and I think you get a better experience that way anyway. But if you're paying well over $1,000 or pounds for this, and then you discover it hasn't got any speakers, you might be disappointed. So it's worth knowing that before you go in, that you will need a headset or your own speaker system in order to use it. However, I don't think that's enough to put me off anyway. I think it's still a fantastic display, really awesome for gaming, and a fantastic looking thing. And in the end, you've got a really nice monitor, that'll make you the envy of all your friends and will give you hours and hours of gaming bliss. It'll certainly be joyful for me anyway, because I'm going to purchase this monitor if Samsung don't let me buy it off them and make me send it back first. Hope you found this video useful. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions. A quick shout out to Meaty Keyboard and Raw, who are YouTube members and have clicked that join button to get added extra benefits for being a member of my channel. I really appreciate their support, and if you'd like to find out the benefits available to you, click join and see what's available. Thanks for watching. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Hope you found it useful, interesting, hilarious, or all of the above. Be sure to check out the description for other information you might find interesting, and subscribe and watch these other videos as well that I think might be useful to you, and have a great life.